Science couldn't explain it, but there it was, alive in the deep, deep waters of the Amazon. A throwback to a creature that had existed 100 million years ago, immensely strong and destructive.
Discover the Horror Podcast.
So I noticed that when we discuss monsters, we often view them individually. We talk about, like, this is how Frankenstein exists in our culture, or this is how Dracula works in our collective and individual psyches. But I've noticed that we rarely think of them as on a continuum or as part of a series and how they relate to each other. But that's really kind of how they exist. One logically follows another, and another after that. And as with all things, there's a beginning and an end, an alpha and omega, the bookends that define the contents of the library, the top and the bottom slices of bread that define what is sandwich and what is not sandwich. And whether Universal bigwigs at the time knew it, whether 3 generations of monster fans at the time knew it, or whether a new generation of then young cinematic monster fans knew it or not, in the mid-1950s they were reaching the end of an era when Universal ended its classic monster series with the Creature from the Black Lagoon films over 3 short years from 1954 to 1956. Made it the absolute apex of America's ongoing but somewhat damaged love affair with itself, these films are understandably popular with baby boomer cinephiles and those of us that can daydream their teenage matinees into easy existence. The creature himself bridges a gap between old and new. He is ancient, perhaps antediluvian. He's a monster, but his presentation is scientific and modern. The setting of the films is the modern era, but they often explore wild and untamed areas. The films run from the gothic settings of their predecessors, but contain some of the very same themes. The creature himself seems an odd addition to the mythology that Universal established. A South American merman from the bottom of a river is a strange companion to a vampire, werewolf, mummy, and a creature assembled from the parts of others. But in a way, he actually contains parts of all of them. The creature can be as vicious as a Dracula or Wolfman, but his metamorphosis at the end of the series makes him as pitiable as Larry Talbot. He is an ancient thing trying to navigate a modern world like the Mummy, and by the end of his 3-film cycle, he becomes a Frankenstein monster, a creature with its humanity thrust upon it by ambitious madmen who then abdicate all responsibility to teach it or show it compassion. The creature films complete a cycle which invite us to examine their entire cycle. We've been bringing you discussions about the entire classic monster series over the last year, and I gotta tell you, when you're discussing a film like She-Wolf of London in the middle of the cycle, the relationships of one monster to another become pretty blurry. But this time through on the Creature trilogy, I couldn't help but notice that not only is the Creature the final series of films chronologically, in some ways those films do a particularly good job of handling themes that cropped up over and over again in the Universal cycle, putting them into modern contexts and bringing the entire series out of the somewhat foggy middle Europa of the classic films and into the sometimes hard light of the modern day. Welcome to Discover the Horror. Our goal is to introduce you to horror you've never seen and give you new ways to see horror you've loved for years. I'm Aaron Abishan. I teach film production and film studies at a university and write about horror just about anywhere I can.
I'm John Kitley. I run Kitley's Crypt and staff writer for Horror Hound magazine.
And I'm Damian Glonick, co-creator of Living Dead Dolls.
On this episode, we will discuss the 3 films in the series, Creature from the Black Lagoon from 1954, Revenge of the Creature from 1955, and The Creature Walks Among Us from 1956. But before we do, this was an interesting situation, because we watched all of the Universal classic monster films, all of them, by franchise, and then in order of release, and we're ending right here. And I don't think I've ever done that in totality before, and that made this viewing of the Creature films pretty unique for me. So what was it like for you guys?
I think the last time I watched the Creature films, I did watch all 3 in a row, back to back.
But had you previously watched all of the Universal films in order?
Ever.
No, I will usually get on a kick and watch a couple, maybe 2 or 3 or even 4. I have done the Creature series pretty much almost back to back, I think, in an afternoon before, which is what I did here. But I always love going back to the old classics anyway, so it's not uncommon for me to do that.
Yeah, I love going back to the old classics as well, but I don't think I've ever viewed them like this. It was almost like when you get one of those Universal Monster Films books and you read it from back to front. It really feels like I don't know, we talk about this on the show pretty regularly, but watching them in order or watching them close to each other or whatever it is often creates an interesting sort of understanding of the films. And I got to say, over the course of and I didn't bother to go look, but I know that we've been doing this for at least a year, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly when we started, but what that means for as many monsters, as many films as there are, that at least about once a month I'm dipping, or once every couple of months I'm dipping back in, taking a deep dive, and it just felt like, wow, I feel like I'm seeing them in a way that I haven't seen them before. Because if there is a series of films in the world that I've seen the most, it's the Universal monster films.
I will say that every time I go back to any of these, it I see something different, or I pick up something that maybe I didn't catch the first time. Um, my rating of these three here has dramatically changed over the last 20 years. Dramatically, especially on the last one. So it is
Ooh,
interesting
that'll
every
be
time
interesting.
every time we go back to, or I go back to these, you notice something, or you pay attention to something, and if you do watch them back to back, then you'll notice. I mean, it's very well. We'll get into it, but it's obvious the design is slightly different between the three films, so there are changes. And it when you do them back to back, it's easier to see those.
It's interesting that it's been almost 10 years or 10 years since the release of what was like House of Frankenstein before
That was
Creature came
in
out,
that was in 45
right? So almost 10 years,
or that was 44. House of Dracula was 45.
right?
So yeah,
Okay, so
So
almost
yeah,
10.
exactly 10 years.
Plus, these hadn't hit TV yet. So if
Right.
you're a 10-year-old kid in 1954, you've never seen Dracula and Frankenstein.
yeah. So maybe that's why I was just gonna say it's interesting how this was so easily brought into the whole pantheon of Universal monsters with a 10-year gap between their last effort of film introducing Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, and then Creature from the Black Lagoon coming 10 years later, but fit in right in with the rest of the monsters with like kind of no questions asked. Where something like, well, I guess it's also how well of a movie it is. Like the Mole People, never something that never really caught on, or This Island Earth. It never really became a famous monster like the other classics like Creature did. But obviously, Creature from the Black Lagoon is a better movie than all those anyway. So,
Uh-oh. Shots fired.
Yeah.
sorry. I like Creature from the Black Lagoon better than the Mole People and This Island Earth.
But let's think about that real quick, though. Here's if you're a 10-year-old kid in 1954, and this is your first Universal monster, those films are out 10 to 15 or even 20 years with like Dracula and stuff. We're watching a movie comes out in the theater, and we're going, oh, yeah, another 3 months it'll be on streaming, or we'll have it on Blu ray. Those poor bastards back then. Yeah, there was a movie out years ago. I don't know what it is, though. I've never seen it. I've just seen photos of it.
Yeah, right. So that whole shock theater package for a kid, it didn't matter that Dracula came out in the 30s and the Creature came out in 50s. They see them all at the same time. Yeah, they're all
Yep.
lumped together. So it the way we watched it and the separating them, it's interesting on our aspect. But as a kid seeing it all together, I guess it doesn't matter.
And I think that there's something to be said. I think you're both right, but I also think there's something to be said for like that continuum that I talked about. So these kids go to the theater when they're 10 in 1954 and they see The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and then they go see The Revenge, and they go see Creature Walks Among Us, and now it's 1956, right? And there's a couple of year gap, and then all of a sudden all these movies come to television in 1958, and they're 14, and their older brothers have a collection of EC comics, which would have ended in 55, and it's like, I don't know, I feel like there's something to be said about that moment in our culture and how all of a sudden this giant group of kids got really interested and just kind of hoovered up into one place. I I mean, because I think that this pantheon is created not so much by Universal and its marketing team. They've just taken advantage of what the culture decided to do and say, yeah, Frankenstein and the Creature from the Black Lagoon, that makes perfect sense to us, even though it makes no sense at all, really, in a lot of ways.
It's interesting to see the difference in the advancement in technology
Yeah,
in filming and cinematography and all that stuff from from 1931 to where we get to here, where you have an underwater 3D movie.
Yeah, we start our cycle with a movie that doesn't even have music outside the intro and outro titles, and here we have a movie that's a series of movies that are famous for using an audio, what is it, a music cut that is so well known. Dun dun dun. You know
Yeah.
that one music cut that gets used ridiculously often, at least in the first two films.
also the creature just looks is a fantastic looking monster, and obviously steals the show. But there are no in any of these films. There's really no iconic character like a Boris Karloff, a Bela Lugosi, a Lon Chaney Jr. that really stands out. I mean, I know John Agar has been in a ton of shit and he's in the second one, but you know, a lot of the previous Universal monster films always had the, whether it be Claude Rains or Basil Rathbone or something like that. There was no real, I think, classic, iconic Universal actor in any of the creature films.
I don't know. The only one I can
Yeah.
think of is what's her name? Julie Adams. Is that her name?
Yeah. But
Because she's Fay Ray.
in here,
Yeah.
but then there's Richard Carlson was in some films. Same with Richard Denning,
Oh
Jeff
yeah,
Morrow. So
they were
you
in
had
films, but they're not like they don't have that iconic remembrance.
Yeah.
not when it comes to the Universal monsters, but if you
Right.
compare them into the 50s, they have their own marketing from those films because that's the era that they appeared in.
But you're right, Damien. I get what you're saying. It didn't turn out a Bela Lugosi. I mean,
No,
Yeah.
right.
Dracula made
Right.
Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
Frankenstein made Boris Karloff. They did not create any of that. It just
No.
because I think what you said initially is right. The suit, the rubber suit, is the star of the show on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
And I believe there was an interview with Julia Adams, and she was saying that it was frowned upon to be in horror films at that time. Like it was kind of like, that's what you're going to do with your career, or that you got to do that movie. It didn't hold the stature that they had in the past.
No. But also that was the studio system, so you were told what film you were going to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were a contract player, and it's funny to go back and listen to the commentaries and read about this stuff because I mean, one thing that crops up in all three of these films is that so many of the actors in all three of the films were contract players with Universal, and so many of them from the first to the last film were like, "Nah, crap,"
Yeah.
when Universal said you're going to do this.
But I went to a screening. This is several years ago that Julie Adams was at a screening of Creature, and she said she made a ton of different films. This is the one that she is remembered from,
I think they all
and
do that.
and I've heard that from other film stars that they've made a lot of big Hollywood, big budgeted films. It's the horror films that they're remembered from. So
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah. That could be
absolutely.
so many actors and actresses.
We're the only real fans.
That is true. We are the fans.
well, these are the only real movies. Those other ones are.
See underwater thrills never photographed before. See Titanic underwater battles never dreamed of before in this most terrifying of the science fiction adventures.
We start out with the first one, Creature from the Black Lagoon, about a group of scientists that go deep into the Amazon to a place known as the Black Lagoon. They hope to find more remnants of a strange fossil that was discovered there of what looks like some sort of an amphibian hand found in that area. But they end up finding much more than the fossil or bone, but a living gill man. As they try to figure out how to capture it, they didn't realize that it had become attracted to their female companion following the Beauty and the Beast angle made famous by King Kong. Now, the history behind this film is almost as fascinating as the movie itself. Producer William Allen first had an idea about a story about some aliens that crash on Earth, but just want to get back home. This would be called It Came from Outer Space, 1953, which was directed by Jack Arnold, filmed in 3D, and was a huge hit for Universal Studios. So, of course, they wanted a follow up. Alan remembered a story that he had heard back in the days when he worked with Orson Welles from a Mexican cinematographer named Gabriel Figueroa about a supposedly true story of a half man, half fish creature that lived in the Amazon, which would come down once every year to claim a mate. That was enough of an idea to get Alan started. It went through several script versions from Maurice Zim, whose script was completely different than what the final product is, then to Arthur Ross, and finally to Harry Essex, who had written It Came from Outer Space. Titles went back and forth from Curse of the Amazon, The Stone Claw, The Manfish of Horror Lagoon. That's a fun one. To finally what we have now, Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, Creature would be the very first 3D film to be shot underwater, with a huge help by Scotty Wellborn, who shot all the underwater sequences and was not credited in the first film other than, I think, special assistant. He wasn't cinematographer. When Wellborn and director Arnold were picked up by a local guy named Rico Browning to scout out different areas to shoot around Wacala Springs, Florida, they had Browning swim in front of the camera so they could test it out, which led Browning to becoming hired to play the creature. Also, shout out to Ben Chapman, who played the creature anytime he was out of the water, but we'll get more into that later. Now, one of the most important things about this film, something that still holds up today, 70 years later, is the creature itself that we mentioned in the beginning of the podcast. Each and every time I watch this, I am in awe of the design as well as the functionality of it. It looks like a real fucking creature. Now, while Bud Westmore is solely credited for the makeup, we all know or should know that is not the case. In fact, we can once again say, fuck Bud Westmore, since he not only likes to take credit for the stuff he didn't do, but he would also go out of his way to screw people over. Case in point, the actual creation of this creature. Now, the first design was from Chris Mueller Jr., which was his design was known as the Polywog design because it was more of a fish face appearance, smoother surface, and bulging eyes. The studio wasn't happy with that, so according to Mueller, while Jack Kevin and Tom Case did most of the actual sculpting, the final design came from Millicent Patrick. She worked for Westmore as a makeup designer. She actually went out on a publicity tour for this film to promote the movie. When Westmore got wind of this, even though she was always stating in interviews that it was all Westmore's work, he refused to have her back when she returned. Again, fuck Bud Westmore.
I concur.
Director Arnold was at the top of his game during this era. He went on to direct Tarantula, the sequel to this film, and his opus, The Incredible Shrinking Man, in 1957, and eventually moved into directing episodic television. Creature from the Black Lagoon stars Richard Carlson. What?
He also made a blaxploitation film with Fred Williamson. Jack Arnold.
Did he?
Yes, he directed Boss N-Word.
He directed that?
Yes.
I was going to say, if you're going to interrupt, have the information ready. But then I went, oh, okay.
He has the information. Just all of us are suddenly very uncomfortable with it.
I have it. Yeah. I just don't know how to say it.
All righty. So the film stars Richard Carlson returning from It Came from Outer Space as our hero who just wants to discover what the creature really is. Richard Denning plays the money man who is a bit greedier when it comes to what he wants and plays the screen's jerk. Julie Adams plays the Fay Ray character, and while many things have been interpreted or misinterpreted for decades due to the swimming sequences, which the studio was really nervous about. And then we also have Nestor Pavia, who plays Lucas, the entertaining captain of the boat that takes him to the Black Lagoon. And he is another amazing character actor that is just so much fun to watch. I could go on for days about this. There's so much information about the film. In fact, I crammed as much of that information I could into a retrospective I did for Horror Hound magazine back in issue 78. So feel free to look that one up. But I'll stop talking about this for a sec and get your guys' opinion.
Yeah, the creature's pretty good.
What did you think?
Okay, sequel.
I think I forget how much I enjoy it until I always watch it again. And after watching all these Universal monster movies, I can safely say, as a lot, Frankenstein is my favorite of the Universal monsters. Um, and then the creatures are very close second.
I would agree.
The creature's never been a favorite of mine, just because I have such a deep love for the Wolfman and that pathos that's there. And then Frankenstein is just number one by a mile, and Dracula. I love the old Gothics, but watching them this time, I feel like, and watching the creature, which I think is the most ambitiously made of the films. Certainly, it echoes throughout the rest of the films, and I'm sure we'll talk about this because so much of the footage is recycled from the first film. Um, into the other films. So it echoes, so I mean it's obviously the most important of the series, but watching it again this time, some of the things that I've, like I mentioned in the intro, some of the things that I've loved so much about the other films and the reasons that I like them, I think more, I noticed for the first time really being there in The Creature from the Black Lagoon. So, some of these questions about human ambition and how we use science kind of as a way to stand in front of our monetary and fame based ambitions, and that's kind of a recurring theme over and over in these, at least in the first and the third film. So um watching The Creature again this time, and watching the whole series too, but just this film in particular, um like I said, it's never going to be my favorite, which puts me at odds with, I feel like, a lot of fans, which isn't to say, by the way, monster kids out there, that I don't like them. I love this film series and I love this film. I just have never held it to quite the same regard. And I've been interested in that. I feel like a lot of people who are Universal Monster fans are like, The Creature's either their favorite or their second favorite monster.
I think the suit is so mesmerizing. And to think that this was 54, and you think of a lot of just rubber suits, monster movies and stuff. This creature design is so great. It looks so good. I don't think it could ever be really improved upon.
Paul Blaisdell made it better when he did it as a she creature, but we'll just leave that alone.
Yeah, until he tried to get out of the water.
Right?
That's
That's the
another.
other thing. I can't believe these underwater shots. I'm like, how the fuck can you swim in this? This is
Well,
That's the
that's
amazing.
the really
beauty.
amazing thing.
That's the beauty of the suit. Like Damien, you just said how amazing it looks, but it holds up underwater.
Right.
And the way Browning swims, he looks like a fish creature. He really does. His movements, how he could even freaking see in that costume and to be able to hit his marks and stuff is just amazing. Plus the fact that every now and then he has to try to breathe air from bubbles from a
Yeah,
hose. Jesus
Yeah.
Christ.
yeah. Those he's holding his breath when he's underwater in those scenes.
Yeah.
Well, they would do what's called hose breathing, which he would basically put a hose of air and you breathe in the bubbles somehow. It's a technique that is apparently not easy to do, but if you're used to it, that's how he would do it. But
When we get to the third
damn,
film, you'll see it.
Yeah,
yeah,
They do hose breathing in the film.
yeah.
But the design is so genius on so many levels that I think just that's why I feel like, to what you said earlier in the beginning, John, that all the controversy around who designed it is well earned, because that is an amazing group of people who came together to design it, not Bud Westmore. And but the people who did it, like you said, it was viable underwater. It's a gorgeous design. It's such an expressive face. And then the other thing that's interesting is the two actors who played the creature, Riku Browning and Ben Chapman, were like 6 inches in size difference, and Riku Browning was, like 150 pounds, and Ben Chapman was 6'5" and 220. And it's seamless. You can't tell the difference between the creature in the water and the creature on the land. They were able to design a suit for two very different sized men that fundamentally looks the same to me. Unlike, the last film, when we get Riku in the water in the third film, it's like, oh, that's a different guy.
Well, they also use smaller actors for doubles for Richard Denning, Carlson, and Julie Adams. That way, Browning looked bigger.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also,
Again, film genius.
outside of the fantastic creature design, the moral and the story of this one, I think, is where it does still kind of hold up when you compare it to the other Universal ones, where like Frankenstein, the creature didn't ask for this. These fuckers came into his hometown and started screwing stuff up. Um, and there's a great part in there where they're talking about this land has been untouched by human hands, and 10 minutes later they're flicking cigarette butts in the in the pond, and you're like, "Yep, that's what we do." But it's a really good, and especially as the series go, and especially in the last one, there's a lot of tragic elements in here. And even in this one, he's in his home turf, and these guys come interloping in there and start screwing things up. And he's very territorial. And I think that fits in with the rest of the mythos of the Universal monsters.
Yeah, I do enjoy this story. I like the whole exploration aspect of it. It's almost what do you call it? Like what the hell do you call it? Indiana Jones? He's archaeology. He's like an
Oh, yeah.
archaeologist. So the whole archaeology aspect of it's really interesting. It's something I just find like very interesting story wise for this, that I think it kind of stands out a little more. And it's not like you said, John, it's not a creature built, designed, or anything like that, or is invading human area. He's like, I'm just fucking minding my own business, and here we come, the assholes we are.
There's a lot of that, the assholes we are. I mean, especially, the first film, like you said, John, we've got this unspoiled territory. And then by the second film, it's like, we're going to science him. That means we're going to cattle prod him over and over again. And that's how we're going to teach him, sort of an indictment of behaviorism. So there's this constant conversation about humans that I almost think is unintentional on some levels. Then I really feel like the third film, it becomes intentional. But we see the kind of beginnings of that conversation here for sure with, you can't go up there because you'll die. Well, let's go and let's flick cigarette butts and dump diesel fuel in the water.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. The poison or the retinol or whatever they call it, they start in the first one and they're like, we're just dumping this shit into the water. Well, it just kills or puts everything to sleep for a while. I don't know if those are sleeping. I think those fish were dead.
Yeah.
But again, not as bad as what happens in the second one when they just were like, let's use explosives.
So it's interesting. In probably the late 90s, early 2000s, in the convention scene, Ben Chapman was a frequent guest at horror conventions. You would see him at a lot of them all the time. And in thinking back now at how much it was taken for granted, but think about, Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Mummy. These are movies that we loved, and to meet one of the stars, actors in that movie just was, not possible, unfathomable. But here's Ben Chapman, who's the creature from the Black Lagoon, is right alongside those movies. And here you can actually have met this, more or less, the star of that movie in person. And it's something I think, at the time we probably took for granted because he was always around all the time. But it's just amazing to think that was creature. It was possible to meet someone from the creature from the Black Lagoon, because you think of it as an old classic black and white Universal movie. But in the early 2000s, he was around the convention scene all the time.
Browning was too.
Yeah, Rico Browning did too, but Ben Chapman was everywhere.
Yeah, not as much, but yeah, they were both around. And it is like, yeah, to your point, Damon, these are the last remnants of the Universal monsters, and they're still making appearances. And what's even sadder is neither one of them got screen credit.
That's amazing.
I mean, and it's not like they're a walk-on. These guys busted their ass in these films, no credit.
And it's not like, the monster dash question mark.
Yeah.
Like Frankenstein or something. It was just not even mentioned that someone played a creature, because I don't know, maybe it really is a real creature that they filmed in the movie.
That is exactly why they didn't want a credit, because they wanted people to go, is that a real creature they caught?
By the third movie, though, I think we caught on to it, and they still did not give anybody credit.
That's right. To your earlier point, Damien, I think that's really true, and I think it's important. And Riku Browning just passed away.
Yeah.
We're recording this, and April of 2024. He passed away in February of 2023. So, I mean, we were able to touch touch somebody who was in one of those films very recently. In fact, two good friends of mine are friends with Butch Patrick, and Butch was friends with Riku. And the female that's there, a couple, the woman has had so many troubles with her health. She had cancer, and it's just wrecked her health. And so she was going through a patch of bad health. And it just so happened that Butch was at Riku's house. And so all of a sudden, my friend Emily gets a text one day, and it's Riku Browning on his couch wishing her good health and feel better. This was just a few years ago. I mean, it was possible to get a text from him very, very recently. And I know his health was in decline over the last few years of his life, but it's amazing to think that, at the same time as, you would go to a convention and see the little girl who's drowned in Frankenstein because she was an old lady, the actual monsters from the Universal cycle were still alive alongside those people until very recently.
When we made a Creature from the Black Lagoon Living Dead doll, I had sent one to Rico, and he wrote like a nice letter thanking for the figure and everything.
That's really nice. I always heard that he was a really good guy.
Yeah, I have it somewhere still.
Both of them, because I'd met them both at a couple of different shows, and hearing their stories is just one of those things where you're going, damn. I mean, you guys in sunny Florida in this suit in the heat, at least, well, Rico's underwater, so it's maybe a little cooler. But again, how he ever saw anything, I still can't figure that shit out.
Yeah.
But that had to have been tough work for them to do all that. And so it's nice that at least at some point in their life, they did get credit and did get the notoriety of the hard work that they did.
And another amazing thing I think about these movies is they have never been remade.
Well,
don't give me Shape of Water shit.
That's Del Toro's remake.
I know, yeah. But like you look at all the how many times has Dracula been redone and Frankenstein and
well, Creature has been Creature has been tried to be remade about a dozen different times with anybody and everybody's name attached to that. Rick Baker did a design. Landis was attached to produce with Jack Arnold directing at one point, and Del Toro and John Carpenter was attached at one time.
Peter Jackson was attached.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
he decided to do King Kong instead. Ivan Reitman.
It's amazing with those Hollywood heavy hitters involved that nobody besides Del Toro has managed to bring one to the screen, and even that is not. I mean, it's not explicitly the Creature, right? It's a take on the Creature.
Yeah, it's kind of like his interpretation of what he would have liked to have seen a Creature remake, kind of like where the Creature gets the girl in the end.
Right. Yeah. Which is a weird way to want that to end, but
yeah.
But it's just so interesting that's just not, all the classic monsters and how many classic monster remakes there are, that one just never came to fruition, and it would probably make a good remake.
I think I don't know, man. It would be really hard to top that Creature design.
Yeah. You remake that movie, keep that Creature looking exactly the way it is.
It'll be CGI.
Oh my God. All right.
Even Hammer didn't touch it, right?
No. I mean, you had kind of one in Monster Squad. You had a sea creature.
Yeah.
But nobody's ever really done that story.
Saturday the 14th, you had one.
Yeah. In the bathtub.
Yeah.
Well, Harry Essex, the guy that wrote the final screenplay, wrote and directed his own version of this in 1971 called Octoman.
Oh, yeah. Exactly the same thing.
Exactly the same thing. The makeup was done by some young kid named Rick Baker. I don't know if he went on to do anything else, but
never heard of him.
Yeah. Which is kind of funny. It's like, I'm going to remake Creature and I'm going to make it this way. Okay, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, Octoman is not the Creature, that's for sure. I got to say, going back to the film itself, watching it again, one of the things that really separates it from the others, and I don't know if this was true seeing it in 3D, but watching it in regular old 2D, because you hear about the contemporary reports of having seen it in the theater, and Bob Burns on the commentary from The Creature Walks Among Us talks about how he sat and watched it 5 times when he first, he's like, back in those days you could sit in the theater and just watch film over and over again. He said, I watched it 5 times because it was just so astonishing to them to see that underwater 3D, that they really felt like the creature was swimming towards them. So I don't know if this was the case for those folks, but I noticed this time, and I've noticed it in the past, that underwater footage feels documentary-like to me. It feels so real, that it creates this sense that you're watching something that's happening. And then, like we talked about before, the creature suit is so good that you can, the suspension of disbelief is really, really well done in these films to create this sense of something otherworldly that also might feel like it could exist. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I find this film to be particularly compelling.
I have seen it in the theater in 3D a couple of times at different
Uh-huh.
movie screenings. It is probably one of the best 3D films. And this was with the old red and green or red and blue glasses too. Um, but it's not one of those like House of Wax where there's so many obvious stuff coming at the screen where it's obviously where the 3D effect is. It's just when you're underwater and the bubbles are in 3D, or when the divers are coming at you. It is unbelievable. And the 3D element works. It really, really does. If you get a chance to see this in 3D at a theater, definitely take the chance.
For some reason, I've never watched this in 3D before. But I can say, having watched it in Blu-ray, it is unbelievably crystal clear quality.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Great Blu-ray transfer.
The sequence where he's on the boat and you can see his gills moving as he's trying to breathe. He looks like he is really gasping for breath.
Yeah, it's a really well done. I will, what you said just now about it being some of the best 3D ever. It's obvious you haven't seen Friday the 13th Part 3, but it's really well done.
My bad. I stand corrected. My bad.
As dumb as that as the 3D in that movie is, I do enjoy it because it's so obnoxiously obvious when they point poles and the
spear
but
guns.
that I think your point is exactly right. In The Creature, I have seen it in 3D subsequently, to having seen it originally, and it is well done because it doesn't ever feel like they resort to any cheap tricks. It just really feels like you're seeing something, but it just has more depth.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, there's the divers swim at you. When the creature swims at you, it's like, whoa, that it feels like he's coming towards you.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. It's one of those that holds up. You can watch the older films and maybe, get nitpicky on the makeup and stuff, or maybe the staging, but damn, some of this is really still holds up. There's some probably unintentional not really humor, but just the dated material, like I said, with the cigarettes and stuff, where you're going, oh wow, that doesn't hold up there.
And as many times as I've seen The Creature, the way that they deliver the first viewing of The Creature in this film, it just so holds up to me. It's such a smart way to do it. First we see the kind of the fossilized claw, and then as it goes on and on and on, we see a hand or a foot of the creature, and we see its face very briefly, like they let it flash very quickly. So it's funny because I am soaked in The Creature. We were talking about this before we started, but I've painted, where the hell that thing went. I've painted a number of models, full size models or little busts of the creature. I have examined this design closely over and over and over again. And yet whenever I watch the movie, I'm still kind of like, what's it going to look like whenever it shows up? Because they do such a good job of introducing the piece at a time. They build that suspense really, really well. And it's 25 minutes in before we see the whole creature. And it's not like, one of my biggest problems with Curse of the Werewolf from Hammer is just how little they use the werewolf makeup on screen. And in this film, it's a nice balance. I feel like it's like the perfect balance of, we don't, we're hinted at it over and over again, and then we see bits and pieces of it, and then eventually we see the whole monster, and then we get a lot of the monster at the end. So it's just, as far as how much screen time the monster gets to build the suspense around what it's going to look like, I can't think of many films that have done it better than the original Creature from the Black Lagoon.
See, I kind of wish that it was a little bit more of a reveal, like, in Frankenstein, when you first see the monster, and it's that slow turn of his face, from darkness into light, and you're like gasping, like, oh my gosh, because no one that, in 1931, no one's ever seen anything so horrifying before. Where the creature is so amazing, I kind of wish that the first time they show him, it wasn't like a quick, like, oh yeah, here's the creature, and it's like Flash swimming up. It's a little, if it was like a slower reveal of the head turning or something like that. I mean, it's cool when they show the hands at first coming out of the water, but when they reveal the full face and figure, I kind of wish it was a little bit more dramatic in the way it was revealed. Because
come on, with that music.
Yeah.
That music made it dramatic.
Yeah, but it's such an amazing suit, and I find, like, every time watching this film, you want to pause and be like, study, like, where are all the like the little scales and fins and armor plates on this thing. It's just, I can't say enough about how great of a makeup suit this is.
But it's funny, you mentioned that, and I think that what you just talked about refers back to what I was talking about in the intro, like the difference in the technology and what audiences expect and how you build suspense from 1931 to 1954 is part of the examination you can do with these films, because I'm not trying to put this in your mouth and say this is what you were saying by any stretch of the imagination, but you made the comparison, so I'll just continue it. Like, imagine had they used something similar to how they did the reveal in Frankenstein and the Creature from the Black Lagoon, right? One of the most unnatural reveals. One of my favorite reveals in film history is also ludicrous. I mean, he walks into a room backwards,
Yeah,
and
right,
then
right.
we do this weird bonk, bonk, bonk edit up to him in silence, which is, you can see the entire edit. And it's such a weird way to do it. Super effective for its time, but so a product of its time.
Yeah.
Nobody would ever expect or accept that nowadays. So that's one of the things that I think is really fun about watching these movies like this, is that you get a chance to kind of interrogate the films, not just on their own merit, but also kind of like how they evolve. I mean, there's a lot of evolution in filmmaking between Dracula and The Creature Walks Among Us.
Evolution being the key word with creature movies.
Boy, yeah, absolutely. That's the theme.
This last time I kept catching myself when the creature was on land and they started to do a close-up. I'm looking in the mouth to go, can I see his teeth? Can I see in there? I still can't. It looks like a goddamn fish mouth.
Yeah, all the way down. It's really impressive.
And when you compare it to the aliens of that time, like James Arnaz and from the original Thing from Another World, that's a guy. That's a guy in a suit. That's a guy. And then you look at Creature and you go, I think that's a guy in a suit. Fuck, could be a real creature. I don't know.
Because it literally looks like the way his mouth moves like a fish, like he's literally gasping for air. It's like a perfect fish movement, like trying to breathe.
Yeah.
Well done, everybody, except Bud Westmore.
Bud Westmore. And I got to say, I don't like bullies, and I don't like injustice, as a rule. And I love what has happened with the reputations of all these people. I mean, it sucks what had to happen to, especially Millicent Patrick, whose career, Bud Westmore destroyed her career. He made sure that she never worked again. And what a piece of garbage Bud Westmore was.
Did she work?
Amen.
Didn't she work for Disney? Or was
before
that?
Yeah, she was
before it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was before that, but she was also one of the first female animators in the world. That book that was written, The Lady from the Black Lagoon, is very much worth everybody's time to hear about, not just Millicent Patrick and her struggles, but also it's written by, I can't remember the woman's name who wrote it right now, amazingly, but it's written by a woman who has spent time in the film industry, and also has a lot to say about that. So Mallory O'Meara, she brings together both Millicent Patrick's experience and the experience of women in general. But Bud Westmore, I mean, the only story you need to know about Bud Westmore is that, so the Westmores, for those folks out there who aren't super familiar, were a dynasty. There was a time when literally every single major studio in Hollywood had a makeup department, and that makeup department was run by one of the Westmore brothers. And Bud was the one who ran the one at Universal, but he wasn't the one that Universal necessarily wanted. They wanted his brother. His brother had a drinking problem, and so what did Bud do the night before his brother was to go interview for the job at Universal? Took him out and got him fucking wasted. And so he wasn't able to make the interview the next day. And so Bud was able to step into the role and became one of the best known makeup artists of a dynasty of makeup artists for doing films like The Creature from the Black Lagoon, destroyed people's careers. And I am just in love with the fact that these people are being recognized now. And literally, you never hear anybody have this conversation without saying, Bud Westmore, what a fucking piece of shit that guy was. Like, his reputation is being absolutely destroyed because, and which is the only fair thing to have happen. There's so much justice in that. And I love the fact, if you can take one thing away from this podcast that I have to say, it is remind yourself not to be Bud Westmore.
What if Jack Pierce was still around?
He would have built it up with collodion, and it would have fell apart when it hit the water.
The suit's falling apart in the water again.
So
he's like, that's because you're a bunch of idiots. He was real mean about it.
A weird bit of trivia. So Alan worked with Orson Welles back in the early days, and he was his assistant on Citizen Kane. And Citizen Kane is a sort of a biopic of William
Randolph Hearst. Yeah.
Yeah. His big mansion that Hearst lived in.
Xanadu. Yeah.
One of the main architects was Millicent Patrick's father.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a little loop there. Yeah. I read that in her book, and it's like, damn, what are the odds of that?
Yeah.
But yeah, recently, every time we've been watching a Universal movie, even one of the Hitchcock films, makeup, that Bud Westmore, and I'm sitting there with my wife, and I'm like, fuck that guy.
Yeah. Rightfully so. But, talking about that makeup, too, it's interesting to think. I think a lot about the inevitability of design whenever it comes to things like this. And what I mean by that is, because the creature looks like it looks and has looked like it has looked for so long and has become an icon, it almost seems inevitable to us on some levels that it would have looked like that. And the creature's evolution is so well documented that it's just interesting to go back and read and see kind of how far away from what we ultimately got some of the designs were. And the head of the studio, John, you may know better than me, I can't remember his name, but the head of the studio really wanted a different design and pushed hard for them to do a different kind of more humanoid design, which ultimately they were in a time whenever, these people had a lot of power. Even he apparently recognized that the design that he wanted didn't look good on camera, but they made it. And so we were not, as a culture, that far away from having a very different looking creature. And who knows how successful or unsuccessful it would have been. But it's weird to think that there were very powerful forces in the background who did not want the creature that we ultimately got and have been discussing at length today.
Well, if you and you could probably find these online, but what they refer as the polywog design, if you see that, and then they came up with what we finally used, you could see the studio going, oh yeah, that one's much better. That one will work. And nothing against the original one, because they were trying to make, a fish creature. But I do think the detail in the final one, and I'm pretty sure that, you look at the original drawings from Millicent Patrick, it's all there. It is all there. There's a great book called The Creature Chronicles by Tom Weaver that covers all the films. Ton of great photos in there. McFarlane put it out. A lot of detail about the film. So if you're a big fan of this series, I would recommend that book too.
Yeah, the look is probably one of the reasons for the popularity of the film.
I think so. Yeah,
certainly.
Yeah.
certainly. I mean, it's such an iconic design, and as we've discussed, there's just there. I feel like that's what we've discussed. We haven't discussed the film's plot very much. We just keep going, boy, howdy, that
Everybody's
thing looks.
seen the film. I mean, it's and you don't want to give away spoilers other until maybe the end of the last one.
I will say that to the film itself, one thing I wanted to bring up, Richard Denning's Dr. Mark Williams is an interesting character. I usually don't like those kinds of characters, but I really like him here because it creates this thing that I think we become, by Night of the Living Dead, it's almost de rigueur for horror films to have this kind of tension. But I don't know if it was quite as prevalent then because he makes it feel unsafe. You're on this little boat, you're in the Amazon, the water is obviously a problem because that's where the creature is, and the land doesn't look like it's much safer. And so you're supposed to be safe on the boat, but you're not safe on the boat because you're on the boat with that asshole. And I think that, it creates a really nice bit of tension that just strings itself along through this entire film. Watching it again, I was able to kind of pull myself away from my immediate dislike of that character archetype and also of that character in general. I mean, you're supposed to dislike him. I don't think I'm saying
Yes.
anything out of,
Yeah.
he's intended to be disliked, but boy, he's dislikable. And I like him for being dislikable. It makes sense here.
I love the line where they're trying to still find the fossils, and I think it's even before they see the real creature. And he's like, "Well, if the professor that found the fossil of the hand, if his discoveries are well founded, they already have the fucking hand," and he's making it like, "Well, if it's real, what are
Yeah.
you talking about?"
Yeah, that's right. It's funny too, watching all of these movies, they found just like the most, I mean, it's such, I mentioned that, America's love affair with itself, but every one of the men and women in these three films, all of them are like these square jawed
Yeah.
men, I mean, they find these amazing specimens. They're all named like Rex and,
Yeah.
they all, and they just find all these people who are like perfect specimens of American, the American ideal. And,
That's
and,
yeah, and I think that's one of the problems where it's like the characters or the scientists all just blend together in all three of these movies. No one really stands out as like I was saying earlier, like an iconic actor because none of them, they all look the same. I mean, maybe you got John Agar's deep voice going on, but I mean, generally, like who the hell's who in all three of these movies?
That's funny. It's true though.
I do think Richard Carlson's optimism in the first one, that he's just like, it's all about the discovery and all about advancing man's knowledge. I mean, almost to a fault, where he's just like, this is the greatest thing ever. And that makes a perfect flip side to Denning's character, who just wants to kill it so he can make money off of it, as opposed to advancing science.
You know who's the only memorable character? Was it Lucas?
Lucas.
Yeah.
I love Lucas.
He's the
This
only
is
one you remember.
impossible, but Lucas do it.
Yeah.
And how he's the kind of guy who can just pull a knife and grin the whole time.
Yes. On the boat, Lucas is the captain, or the captain goes. The
Yeah,
captain is the-
exactly.
Oh my God, he is so goddamn funny in there.
But I think that's an interesting thing. It's like one of the things that you do feel comes out of these films is even the characters who are intended to be likable are, the unlikable characters are often foregrounded, for one thing. They're often given more to do, at least in the first and third films. The second film almost feels like, and we'll get to this, that like you're supposed to like the characters, but they unintentionally come off as unlikable because of some of their methods. But really, the trajectory of the films leads it to where all the pathos goes to the creature too. So the creature is
Yeah.
the most interesting thing to look at
Yeah.
in the film, and by the end of it, it's the only character you really like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Here he comes. Be careful, Cleet.
That was lesson number one. He knows the prod can hurt him. Put the cage down and stay close to the wall.
Right.
So our second film, the follow-up to Creature from the Black Lagoon, is 1955's Revenge of the Creature. Once again directed by Jack Arnold. This one stars horror icon John Agar, who's been in so many films, I'm not even going to begin to name them. But it also featured the screen appearance, first time uncredited screen appearance, of a young Clint Eastwood in the beginning of the film. The creature in this film was again played by two people on land. This time it was played by Tom Hennessy, and also once again played by Rico Browning underwater. Though I will say there is a Ben Chapman cameo in this film, because at the theme park there's a cardboard cutout of the creature from the Black Lagoon from the first movie out of water, and that's Ben. So,
What if you got a paycheck?
and which is funny because I actually have that, you can buy that cardboard cutout. So how crazy is that? That it was used in Revenge of the Creature, and you can still buy that today. So in what is a logical sequel to the first film, a group of scientists return to the Amazon and head to the Black Lagoon and search for the creature and bring him to an aquarium to study, but mostly just put him on display for people to gawk at. With no Julia Adams around, this time the gill man falls for John Agar's girlfriend, played by Laurie Nelson. As expected, the creature escapes his chains at the aquarium and terrorizes the crowds and ultimately abducts Laurie Nelson to take her back to his new grotto somewhere in Florida. But alas, John Agar comes to the rescue and our creature flees into the depths. Using the working titles of Return of the Creature and Return of the Creature from the Black Lagoon, filming took place at Marineland of Florida, which played the part of the film's Ocean Harbor Oceanarium, and St. John's River stood in for the Amazon in this film. This is some of the worst portrayals of scientists I think I've ever seen in a movie. They abduct this creature and bring him back and put it in an aquarium. Not to like some kind of lab to study alone or anything like that. They throw him in aquariums for people to come look at. And their whole method of teaching is like, well, hit him with this cattle prod until he learns the word no, or not no, stop.
Yeah.
It's like, what were like, what is these scientists think? There's like such bad scientisting.
I wrote it down. I wrote, now here's what John Agar says. Now you say stop in your throat, Mike. He won't know what it means, so I'll condition him with this bull prod, which sounds like about the best way to explain mid-century behavioral science that I can think of. You know, when we're like, what would happen if you scooped out this rabbit's eyeball and put some right guard in there? Let's find out, you know.
I mean, they chained this poor creature down to the bottom of an aquarium.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what's really funny is I don't think that this movie played at the time in the same way it plays today, because I don't think that people saw there being a problem with treating something that was quote unquote an animal like they treat it. So, I mean, you watch this movie now and I feel like you're watching these people who are supposed to be the good guys and you're like, what a bunch of bastards, you know?
Exactly. That's why I feel like, I mean, this is one movie I'm absolutely rooting for the creature to kill everyone, because
absolutely
everyone's a dick in this film.
It's even worse that it's the scientists are doing a lot of this. If the the guys, the divers, are, you can see them being jerks because they're risking their life to put this in there, but the scientists that are trying to figure this shit out are the ones that are usually doing the worst things, and you're just like, you're bad scientists,
right? It's not like Fritz with a torch going into like,
here's a highly educated man, hit him with the prod.
But I feel like that's exactly what it is. It just uses science to be like, hey, what would happen if I went in here with the torch and stuck it in his face? Let's like, it's that, but then it's like, let's write it down after and see what he does, you know, like, it's tremendously. I don't know that I'd ever noticed how horrendous they were quite like I noticed it in this particular viewing.
Yeah.
And one interesting I picked up on, which is not mentioned in any of these films, and I feel like I'm perhaps, with a high school science background, better scientist than them. But so they get the creature out of the Amazon. They put him in a tank in this oceanarium, which I don't even know what the fucking oceanarium is. Apparently, it's not an aquarium. But he escapes and he goes into the Atlantic Ocean, so he can breathe fresh water and in salt water.
Well, he has lungs, as we find out later, so I guess he can just do whatever he wants, really.
Yeah, it's like, and no scientist was like, "Oh, look, he can breathe in fresh water and salt water." Not many fish can do anything such as that.
You have to remember this is the same time that rocket ships were going into space where the chairs had seat belts on them. That's all. They were office chairs with seat belts. So not a lot
Yeah.
of advancement in science. So maybe we didn't even know there was salt water back then.
I would like to think we knew the difference between freshwater and saltwater marine life.
You never know.
So, not to veer too far off, but to give that some context, my philosophy professor in college, his brother-in-law worked on the Manhattan Project, right? So 1945, which is 9 years before this movie is made. And he told a story about how these scientists, they assembled the best scientists in the world to work on the Manhattan Project, the one that developed the atomic bomb. And he said that one guy died, a scientist died because they brought a box in with 2 pieces of uranium, like a shoe box with 2 hunks of uranium in it, and took pencils. They had a Geiger counter mounted over it, and they just scooted them together to see what would happen. When they got them close enough, the Geiger counter went fucking bananas, and that guy reached into the box and pushed them apart. The best scientists, the best atomic scientists in the world in 1945 did not yet know, don't stick your hands in the box full of uranium. You'll die from it, So, I mean, maybe the science wasn't that great yet in 1955.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. There's a lot of fuzzy science in those 50s movies that
Yeah, true.
you always watch them now and you're going, oh, they're just making this stuff up, like putting something that's radioactive, putting it in water, and that'll cover you. So
Yeah.
maybe they really didn't know at the time
I
that
mean,
how
but
dangerous that shit is.
yeah, of course they make up a lot of science in these films, but to me these were just bad scientists. Like they
Yeah.
weren't even making stuff up that's believable. They were just doing, I don't want to say immoral things, but like something that okay, so they were doing immoral things.
They were doing moral things, yeah.
They were doing human things.
And that is the crux of it, John, what you just said. I mean, eventually that's kind of what one of the central tensions in these movies is, what does it mean to be a human? And part of what it means to be a human in comparison to this animal is like, this animal does what it does instinctually, but we do it with thought. We're cruel because we think about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really goes to the future of like SeaWorld and all of those where they're capturing these animals and put them
Yeah.
in captivity. It's the same thing here. The creature in here was at least smart enough to break out and say, fuck this place, I'm out of here.
I mean, like
And
I can see that being the end goal. Oh, we want to put the creature on display, but not immediately back from the Amazon. Maybe in a year after studying it. Okay, now let's make some money off this. No,
yeah,
first thing back from the Amazon, put it in an aquarium, put it in SeaWorld. What's the worst thing that could happen?
In 1955, they probably hadn't completely I know that they hadn't gotten rid of them, because I remember as a kid going to the Missouri State Fair and seeing freak shows. So that there were still freak shows in the 50s.
Oh, sure.
And so
yeah,
we still
totally.
treated people that way. We were still like, well,
Sure.
here's this crazy looking thing. Let's put it out in front. Like the
Yeah.
Kids in the Hall famously had that chicken lady sketch where the chicken lady was like, what are you staring at? You got to pay 6 tickets to look at me. Like that's that's kind of what was going on here. There was an expectation in our culture that if something was different than the mainstream, doesn't matter how human or animal or whatever it was, you could stick it up in front of people and charge them to gawk at it.
as I mentioned earlier, my take on these films change every time I see these. I always really like this film, the revenge one, but on watching on this one, the plot gets thinner and thinner and thinner each time I watch it going. So the creature's just following Agar and Lori Nelson around, just keeps following them, trying to get her back. And that's literally the whole plot of the film after the opening.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that's all we could come up with, apparently.
It does make sense for a sequel to bring the creature back to civilization, right? I mean, that was like kind of a follow up in the Jurassic Park movies.
Right.
That's this. I mean, Jaws 3 kind of took from Revenge of the Creature, right? It's a very similar, and fucking in 3D no less too.
Yep.
Which this movie was also in 3D for whatever reason they decided they needed to do, because I mean 3D was kind of really becoming not so popular at this point in 55. But despite all that, I still enjoy this movie. I think the creature makeup, while slightly changing, especially in the eyes, still looks great. Still very close to the original. I still love it.
One of the reasons why the creature looks different, well, I think it's supposed to be I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a different one, which again, that's kind of doesn't make a lot of sense that they just send two people to go capture that creature after all the stuff from the first one. Like, this guy's a badass. We're going to send two people.
Too bad.
Doesn't make, yeah, too bad. Well, actually, one. The other is the doctor that stays in the boat. They just drop more chemicals in the water and putting bombs in there. But originally, Browning wasn't hired. They hired a guy named John Lamb. The makeup or the mask was fitted to him. And after I think a day of filming, he's like, fuck this, I can't do this. Or Arnold didn't like him, Jack Arnold. So they got rid of him, brought Browning back, and then fitted that mask to fit Browning, which makes the face a little bit different.
Yeah.
And the eyes look different. And you can also see water coming out of the top of the head, which you did not see in the first one.
That's because for this one, they actually did put an air hose inside the suit, where in the first one, it was just all holding breath.
Right.
So, yeah, it is kind of weird. Yeah, you see these bubbles coming from the, top of his head.
The top of his head.
But not near as bad. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about it for the third film, whenever they're doing the air tube breathing and they put the thing in the creature's mouth and it just explodes from the top of his head.
The screenwriter for this one, Martin Berkeley, who wrote Tarantula and the Deadly Mantis, but he's more famous for testifying in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee and naming like 100 people. And so while he continued to work in Hollywood, a lot of people he named got blacklisted. So he wasn't too popular, even though he kept working.
These films have some real villains associated with them.
Exactly. Scotty Wellborn is back, but now as the cinematographer in this film. So at least he got credit for that. And diehard horror fans, one of the guys that gets killed on the beach, one of the teenagers, that's Brett Halsey. Who would be in Return to the Fly and 4 or 5 Fulci films, depending on who he's that Fulci told him he was going to be in a film or not.
And about 172 Italian Westerns.
Yeah.
And Rico Browning asked to be credited in this film, and once again, well, no, I shouldn't say once again, but he was denied. But they did give him a on-screen appearance outside of the creature outfit in one short scene, which if you blink, you probably miss him. But he was denied any credit once again for being the creature.
Yeah, that's pretty sad.
Again, though, I would say in this day and age, amongst monster fans, people know who Jack Arnold is, certainly, and I think he's a very, very famous name. But I would wager that Riku Browning is more famous of a name associated with these films than even Jack Arnold, because the creature itself is so iconic. So it feels like, again, in my little perfect world that lives in my head, that there's some justice that has happened, that Riku, because I got to say, Damien, you mentioned earlier that Ben Chapman used to go to a lot of cons, and maybe that's what it was. But I feel like for a long time, in my head, it was like Ben Chapman was the creature. And then for a couple of scenes, it was Riku Browning. But I feel like that has really evened out over the last few years.
Sure. I mean, watching Actually, even I wonder who has more screen time, the creature underwater or the creature above water in the first film.
In the first one, it's got to be underwater because that's where most of his scenes are. He only comes out on the boat once or twice, and then he's in the cave.
Yeah.
I think a majority of it is all underwater.
Yeah.
And nothing to take away from Chapman, but it is interesting because since they have Tom Hennessy in Revenge of the Creature, his out of the water creature is dramatically different
Yeah.
than Ben Chapman. Ben Chapman's performance is almost like a fish out of water, where that's not his normal environment. Whereas in Revenge of the Creature, he's a pissed off man fish,
Yeah.
fucking
Yeah.
Yeah.
tipping cars over and get
Yeah.
the
Right.
fuck away from me. So very different performance.
And one of the things I noticed about this film that I hadn't really paid much attention to before is that it's incredibly stagey. I mean, it's just so in the first 7.5 minutes, there are a total of 6 camera setups. I mean, a modern film would have 30 camera setups in the first 7.5 minutes. We don't get the first reaction shot until 6.5 minutes into the film. It's one shot with, there's a cutaway, but there's not a reaction shot. So this film is massively stagey, and by that I mean it's all about how the actors are blocked that brings them closer to or further away from the camera all throughout this film, and so it feels really much more wooden than modern films do, and it's even stagier, I feel like, than its predecessor on some levels. So it's funny to just watch it, even though it's much newer than the earlier films in the pantheon. James Whale cut around a lot more than Jack Arnold does here.
Yeah, I think they went back more straightforward. Of it's a monster film, so you're not going to get that technical on what they're showing.
And it's a B movie, right? I mean,
Yeah.
by comparison, it doesn't have as big of a budget. And what does that mean? Well, camera setups cost money. Time costs money. You got to have all those people there, to set the camera up and then go through all the motions. It's like, well, can we get all that in one setup? And that's what you end up with.
Yeah.
The Ed Wood setup, where everything's done in one take.
I do find it interesting that actually it's probably more typical, but they introduced Lori Nelson's character as, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce whatever she had a degree or she's getting
Yeah.
her master in ichthyology or whatever the hell that is. But they make it a point that she's a very intelligent woman and then spend the rest of the film playing a damsel in distress.
But they also, I wrote that in my notes. I feel like they do that, but they also give her a lot of opportunities for men to come up and be like, "Hey, little lady," and she just puts them in their place, which is kind of weird for that time.
Including the creature.
What do you mean?
She tries to put the creature in his place, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
he's a man's man. Or
Ain't having none
fish
of that.
man.
And I feel like the end of this movie is so lackluster.
Because it's the ending of the first one?
It's the exact ending of the first one, shot for shot.
It's literally the ending from the first one.
It's very undramatic.
But it's I mean, did they recycle the shot of the creature floating in the water? Because I watched a little.
That's the exact same shot.
Exact same shot. I thought it had to be either that or they just redid it because it's crazy. I mean, it's a shot of the two hugging each other and then that exact same shot of the creature floating in the water. It's like that shows you something so important about what you were talking about earlier, John, the idea that there was no way for anybody to watch these two films back to back. I mean, we're right at the end of that being not being possible, like, because a few years later you'd have them in shock theater, and certainly if you showed the creature last week, you're probably going to show Revenge of the Creature next week, and you'd at least see them one week to another. But it's like the reasoning's got to be like nobody's going to watch the end of these two films at the same time.
And even worse in this one is because the creature's face looks different. When they use footage from the first one in here, you're going, that's from the first movie? That's the new one? Back and forth.
They also reused some footage from the beginning of the film on Lucas's boat.
Oh, the stock footage?
Yeah, the stock footage of like he pulls like the horn and the alligator gets scared off and jumps off the log. Like that's all taken from the first film. The one thing I think it was nice though, Lucas's boat in the first one's called Rita, and this one is Rita 2. So they at least did that.
A little nod, yeah.
Yeah, it's still I think it's still a good
Yeah,
sequel.
yeah, it is. It's an
Um,
entertaining film.
the problem is the first one is so goddamn good.
Yeah.
It's really hard to follow that up.
Well, and like the third one or not, and I know that it's a controversial film because it does some pretty different things, but this film, Revenge, doesn't do much new, and I think
No.
we've discussed
No.
that. It really is the same movie again. It's the second half of King Kong, really, and
Right.
the first film is kind of the first half of King Kong, um, but it's still King Kong, and it's still exploring those same themes and doing it exactly the same way. So, just that's what makes it difficult because when you compare it to the first is a lot more solid on a bunch of different levels, and so since it doesn't take a chance and try to do anything different, it compares a little bit unfavorably. But it's like you guys said, it's a fun film.
I mean, you think about though. I mean, it's the logical next step because what are they? Otherwise, they're going to be back in the Amazon, spending a whole movie fighting a creature in the Amazon. Like you had to bring the creature back to civilization. I mean, that's the next logical step of the movie. Now, once you bring it back,
Yeah.
what you do from there could be anything, And they chose to throw it in an aquarium, which makes somewhat of a sense.
Tom Weaver and Bob Burns, I think I mentioned this, do the commentary on The Creature Walks Among Us, which I watched last night. Tom Weaver did not come across as being particularly favorable in that commentary for a couple of different reasons. But one of the things Tom Weaver suggested was that he had talked to William Allen at one point, interviewed him, and asked him, did you know that you were doing, I think it was William Allen, it might have been Jack Arnold. I can't remember who he was talking to, but did you know that you were doing King Kong so obviously? And he suggested, it was obvious that I was the first one that had ever asked him that, which seems difficult to imagine how obviously this is a King Kong movie. But, apparently whoever he was talking to, my story just turned to terrible because I don't know any of the players involved, but whoever he was talking to, whether it was Jack Arnold or William Allen, said, yeah, of course I knew it was King Kong. But to the point I was going to make is everybody knows it's King Kong. It's obviously King Kong. If he didn't know he was channeling King Kong, then he was the only one who didn't know that he was channeling King Kong when he made this movie.
Unless you didn't see King Kong.
I mean, and that's okay. We're allowed to explore topics over and over again. That's okay
Right.
in my mind. That's not a cut. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Never before was science so determined. From the deeps of the Caribbean to the underwater jungles of the Everglades, they baited their trap and gambled their lives to put a daring dream to the test.
Gentlemen, the creature can be changed. We can make the giant step and bring a new species into existence.
Here was the grimmest cargo ever to reach civilization. Was this a new being created by a miracle of science?
Fire burned away the outer scale. There's a structure of human skin underneath it.
Or was this a beast made even more frightful by a mortal mind, more powerful by human emotion?
And so, of course, we round out the trilogy with 1956's The Creature Walks Among Us. Another story of science tinged with obsession. This one flies so close to the themes of Frankenstein that you'd be forgiven if you made a comparison or two. A team of scientists, explorers, and maritime workers are hired by the handsome but cruel Dr. William Barton to track down the creature in the Florida swamps in which it escaped in the second film. Dr. Barton has a hard time keeping his ambitions in check and an even harder time not being outright abusive to his wife, Marcia. And one of the interesting things about the film is how Marcia doesn't just lie down and take the demeaning, demanding, and abusive way that she's treated. She regularly defies her husband's manic edicts, including the one where he forbids her to tag along on the first scuba dive to search for the creature. When she swims too deep and mystifyingly suffers from a sort of narcosis, we get to see her warm relationship develop with Dr. Thomas Morgan, maybe the only completely likable character in the whole film outside the creature himself. Dr. Morgan also functions as a philosophical counterpoint to Dr. Barton throughout the film, whose main premise hinges on the idea of how much mankind truly can engineer and how much is dependent on the whims and wishes of nature. Eventually, the creature surfaces and is badly burned in one of a number of scenes that will leave many audience members scratching their heads and going, "What?" Brought aboard Barton's ship, the Vagabondia 3, so that the doctors can try to save its life, the creature responds to his wounds by shedding his gills and becoming visibly more human. As they search for ways to keep him alive, the group realize that in addition to his gills, the thing also has a pair of lungs that they can coax to life. Once accomplished, however, the creature is rendered a land animal forever. And the rest of the story plays out sort of like we'd expect. Barton's obsessions, his wife's distress, and Morgan's attempts to make situations better all take center stage, while the captive creature is almost relegated to background status until a final confrontation brings him back to the front in this final entry into the Universal canon. And it's that tendency, I think, to treat the creature as a philosophical exhibit A, to relegate him to the outer edge of the story very often, and then the relative talkiness of this film that makes it considerably less popular than the other entries that we've talked about already in the eyes of some fans. But its commitment to the exploration of perennial hot-button issues at the core of human existence, including jealousy, ambition, human relationships, and notably our relationship with nature and evolution, that made the film stand out as a particularly strong entry in Universal Monsters cycle to some viewers. Now, I'm of the latter opinion myself, and we can get to that, but where do you guys fall on the spectrum for Creature Walks Among Us?
The first time I saw this, I thought it was silly as hell. Because it's not, to me, initially, it is not a creature movie.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I've watched this over the years, my liking of it and admiration of it has increased dramatically. And right now, I put it up a second before Revenge.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in this film.
Yes, unfortunately, none of it is with the creature.
Well, and that's the, yes, kind of it is. Kind of it is. You have a batshit crazy mad scientist, played wonderfully by Jeff Morrow. You have some that science of what happens if we do this, and irregardless of the outtake or the end result or what it's going to do, and we're not talking like with Aaron was talking about before with the radiation and the bomb. We're talking about a creature, a living creature that they're literally just fucking with. Let's see if we do this, what happens then? And it's horrifying what they do to this thing. And when it first goes back in the water, not realizing that it has been changed, that's pretty sad.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the biggest crimes with the film is you're coming off of two movies with a fantastic looking creature monster. They're action packed, and this one starts again with the creature looking great and underwater and the fighting, and then once it sheds its skin, all that wonderful makeup is kind of lost.
Yes.
And we're left with somehow a creature that grew to a size 6XL in shirt and pants, and another
He's swole.
2 feet in height, and it just looks so dramatically different from the creature that we love. And on the other problem with that is it doesn't do anything. It stands around for most of the movie, or when it's in this form, right? It's laying on a table or bed. It's standing around, and it's not until like the last 2 minutes of the movie it decides to go on a little bit of a rampage. It just doesn't do anything. It really kind of, and then so the rest of this movie is these, again, bunch of asshole characters, and with all their plots and subplots going on, and I feel like the creature took a back seat this time more so than in Revenge.
The creature
Yeah.
for sure takes a back seat. There's no question. But, to your point, John, I completely agree. It's funny, whenever we talked about which movies we were going to take, I was like, I don't really care, whichever. And then this one landed on me somehow. And I thought that my response to it was going to be kind of like you said, Damien, like it's kind of it's interesting because it's ridiculously different. But this time, something just really shone through for me. And honestly, right now, it might be one of my favorite entries. It just takes the things that the first two movies were saying about mankind's relationship with nature and interrogates them and examines them. And the creature is kind of a prop for that whole thing. But the creature ultimately is responding in the way that the director, John Sherwood, I feel like wanted the creature to respond in this case, which is to say that what this film suggests is that the creature's wild activities were based in the other films on being treated poorly, on being hunted in its own environment, on being pursued in its own environment, and then eventually in being caged. And so I feel like, one of the other things I had never really thought that much about was the fact that this is um, the creature is the only monster in Universal's canon that actually sees its story play out one right after the other in a logical sort of sense. So, unlike Dracula or Frankenstein or the Wolfman or even the Mummy, where we see so much time in between and so much inattention to detail that the character goes wildly off in a bunch of different directions, here we have, over the course of 3 years, a character who we see its character arc very clearly. And you may not like where it goes, but the creature in this movie is the creature from the first movie. And it's identifiably that creature from the first movie, and it's used to answer the questions that the first two films create. And so, unlike a lot of other Universals where they go from a really powerful philosophical question that the monster's existence can answer off, where it kind of peters out into comedy, this one very much does. I mean, the ending scene in this film is one of the most poignant shots in Universal history, in my personal opinion. And so, to me, this film really wraps it up in a way that no other Universal monster gets its story wrapped.
I don't have any really problem with the direction they took the story, and it's fine, wanting to give it a little bit more humanity to it, and it develops lungs and whatnot. It's just the fact that they took the iconic image that we love so much and really kind of deflated it so drastically. And even in sense of like the creature taking a back seat to its own film, and that happened with Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein. We saw that happening, but at least we had Basil Rathbone standing up and becoming so interesting, and you really love that character. Where there was no character in this movie that stood up and you were excited for.
Is even though he's the main villain, Jeff Morrow's character, I just had a blast with because he is just so unhinged, and the look in his face, like, and then we can do this, and then he's just like eyes glazed over, like he's freaking on crack, going, "Oh my god, we're gonna do this," and he is so entertaining to watch because he is so off the hook, but I can completely understand your point, Damien, because it's like having a Jurassic Park movie where they have one little baby dinosaur in the sequel. And you're going, what about we came to see the dinosaurs? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But I wonder if they didn't want to repeat what they had
Right.
already done in
Sure.
the first two.
And that's
So
fine.
they wanted to go to something completely different, which they did. And again, when the first time I watched this, to your point, I didn't like it because it's not a creature movie. But when you get past when you start to look past that and some of the other stuff, and it's almost like what we were saying, what the man was doing to the Black Lagoon and the untouched Amazon and spoiling it. Now we're taking this creature and we're doing the exact same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it spends a lot of time talking. That's one thing that a
Right.
lot of people say too, is that this is a pretty talky movie. And if what you want is monster action, this one does not deliver a lot of
No,
monster action.
No, not at all.
nope, nope. Although the creature does seem to get easier and easier to find in each movie, which is kind of interesting.
It is interesting too, like giving him human eyes now,
Hated it.
the expressiveness.
Hated that part. I was
Uh,
like, that's just lazy. That's because they didn't want to put fucking makeup on the eyes and that, or not. I shouldn't say lazy. That's called a budget constraint.
But to me, it worked. I liked it because I liked the fact that, as it becomes human, I mean, we always talk about the eyes being the window to the soul. I mean, there's nothing more human than human eyes. And so that scene, whenever they first cut the bandages off and he's looking around, there's a creepiness to that and a sadness at the same time that
I don't know.
suddenly we see the creature's sort of soul or its humanity or whatever.
Maybe a little gradual effect into his eyes changing instead of such a dramatic, like, oh, he got burned and now he's got regular eyes. There's a guy
Which
hiding underneath here this whole time.
Can we go back to that for a second? What is going on with that burn? Why does that happen? It makes no sense. It's like professional wrestling levels of stupid. I don't even
So,
begin to.
okay. So you have, since you're taking this unknown creature out of the water where he's terrifying and scary, and you have to make him imposing. So therefore, you make him big. You want to talk about batshit crazy science? The fact that his gills and scales are destroyed, so he grows like 3 times his size. I mean,
Yeah.
Don McGowan, who played him, he's like 6'7" or 6'5". He's huge.
And apparently
That
800 pounds.
and that makes no sense. So I agree. And again, watching it the first time, you're like, and why has he got a fucking jumpsuit on? What's up with the scrubs or whatever he's wearing? I mean, it
Budget, we
makes
couldn't.
no sense.
It's all budget, man. We couldn't like afford to do a whole
And
creature.
and that's exactly what it is. But it is a shame that they couldn't do something different, because then I think the story would have really stood out more.
Didn't the second film make the most money at the box
Yeah,
office?
it did, because the first one was so popular. When the second one came out again in 3D for a very short time, but then it made the most money, but I don't think it lasted that long.
All that money's gone. We got no money for the third one.
Well, Universal took it for other stuff, but even the 3D showing of Revenge shortened as they went.
Yeah.
And after a very, very short period of time, it was only in 2D.
Yeah.
But I do think Creature Walks Among Us is one that you have to get past the obvious, but I think there's some really interesting things going on in there. Which is funny, I mentioned earlier about Octoman. Jeff Morrow would also appear in Octoman, so he wasn't done dealing with fish creatures in
And
this one.
wasn't he and was it him and was it Rex Reason?
Yeah.
In
This Island Earth?
this Island Earth, and then Jeff Morrow, of course, was in the greatest turkey of all, The Giant Claw.
It's funny, this movie, Rex Reason, I feel like Rex Reason is the most quintessential mid-century actor, between his name and the way he looks and the fact that he's never wearing a fucking shirt and like just everything about him. I don't know, I love that guy, and he actually gets to be the only character that you really like, and this may be controversial to say so, but Lee Snowden as Marcia Barton, also, even though she's the much beleaguered wife of crazy Dr. William Barton, I don't find her particularly likable either. Every time somebody tries to be reasonable with her, she snaps at them, or she's out there shooting sharks for whatever reason.
Oh my God.
Or...
Right? Like,
I got two of them.
I got two of them. Yeah. Like, oh, they were attacking porpoises, so I shot these two sharks. I'm like, what? This movie's horrible. They just like these scientists or whatever just destroy. She's like, I'm a hunter. Just like I kill anything.
Which just and that's the other thing, is that she's too multi-talented. She's like, I hunt, I scuba dive, I play the guitar. Like we see too many things that she does.
I mean, I did not hate this movie. It just coming off the last two, it's somewhat of a disappointment.
I feel strongly that it's a really good entry.
I do, and let me just say, the ending of this film is fucking tragic as hell, and probably out of, while I'm thinking about it, all of these Universal films, I never remember. Maybe one of the Lawrence Talbot ones, but I don't remember one of these films ending where you're just sitting there going, God damn, that really sucks for this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, and you don't know what happens exactly because, again, unlike the previous one where he jumped into deep water, in this case, we see him walking towards the water. So he could have survived it, but it's not like Damien. You mentioned Son of Frankenstein as a sort of comparison earlier. I think it's a good comparison because in a lot of ways, Son of Frankenstein is the end of at least a cycle of Frankenstein films, an important cycle of Frankenstein films because it's the last Boris Karloff entry. And there we have a kind of pathos with the death of the Frankenstein character that ultimately ends up not being a death, but it's still a monster death, right? It's a aye and fall off on fire into a pit. In this case, it's much more of a person who knows what the concert. I mean, an almost person, a
Yeah.
person whose personness was thrust upon it by others, but it knows the consequences. We've seen it choke at the bottom of the water before, so it knows what it's getting into. But it's like, well, there's no room for me on land, so
Yeah. I mean,
I'm going to go where I go.
like I said, the problem I have with this movie is not the evolution of the story between 1, 2, and 3. It's the execution of how
Yeah.
they told that story.
It could have been. It could have done. It could have been done much better.
Yeah.
The original title at one point was called "The Creature of Man," which I know wouldn't sell tickets to little kids wanting horror movies, but I
Yeah.
think
Right.
that's a great title.
Yeah, I
I will
agree.
say, all three of these movies, and while there's some, well, maybe not all three, but the last two, well, all of them have great posters.
Oh yeah,
Fantastic poster art. The last two are a little similar to each other, but that's okay because they're equally as amazing. So, yeah,
I believe those were all Reynolds Brown. Reynolds Brown did all those.
all
I
three of them, yeah.
believe. I believe. Can't see his name on there because fucking studios wouldn't let him sign him, bastards.
Sounds right.
But yeah, the artwork on a lot of these, and even if you go into the foreign stuff that kind of mimicked what the original studios were doing, a lot of fantastic colors, a lot of
Mhm.
artwork, and capturing things from the film. Whether he's, I don't know, throwing cars or something, but it's
Right.
always pretty entertaining.
Making it, yeah, much more dramatic.
Yes, definitely.
So a final end to the Universal Monsters mythos,
Boy, that's almost as tragic as this movie.
right?
Jeez.
Kind of sad,
Well,
but and if you took the journey with us, watching all of these films, starting with Dracula, it's kind of, you see, it's a really nice evolution to see how filmmaking has changed in a grand sense for sure, from Dracula to Creature Walks Among Us.
I also will say that no matter, and I think hopefully one of the things that we've shown is the more you watch these, you will find more stuff. So
Yeah,
watching these as a kid is not the same as watching them now, and watching them 2 years ago and watching them now could be a different viewing. You could see more stuff. And definitely if you read more about this stuff and you find out, or the commentaries like Aaron was saying, you're going to learn more of the details, and you'll learn how much of a shit Bud Westmore was, always will be. Um,
even watching it sequentially too.
what's
Yeah.
that?
Watching them sequentially,
Oh yeah, yeah.
another fun exercise.
It's a lot of fun seeing these, and you figure for a 25, I think it was about a 20 or almost a 30-year period, where the production values came, where the story arcs were coming, and definitely how the first one comes out and it's a huge hit, and then we just completely start gutting the fish as we go along and get worse and worse. But the creativity is still there, kind of, and you got the people that are behind it still trying to make a decent film. I mean, I give them credit for Creature Walks Among Us for trying to do something dramatically different than rehashing the first two. I think it could have been done a little
Yeah,
bit better.
yeah. Thank God with the second and third film that they didn't rehash either one.
Yeah, because if we'd have had another Revenge or Return of the Creature and done the same thing, then the creature's going to end up going, "Oh my god, another creature movie, great."
Yeah,
But going from, like I said, when I originally first saw this, and again, growing up in the time of VHS, it took forever for some of these films, the sequels, the two
Yeah.
sequels to come out on VHS finally, and being very excited to see that they come out and then go, well, that was kind of silly.
And if you're a fan of modern horror, it's important to see where horror came from, where it started generally, right? I mean, we said Dracula was like really, for the all intents purposes, the first modern horror film.
And to a point you made earlier, Damien, I think you made the point, but when this Blu-ray collection came out, I don't have any of them on 4K yet, and I'm sure it's even truer now, but I don't know that I've ever seen anything which made the presentation of the films itself such a crucial part of your own capacity to understand those films. And so that Blu-ray collection of all the legacy collections that's out, the big box, from which was what I used to watch all of this. I don't know about you guys, but all of this came out of that one big Blu-ray collection, is absolutely, if you are a horror fan and you don't own this, I don't want to gatekeep very often, but if you're a horror fan and you don't own this, a critical part of your horror education is not available to you, in my opinion. And you just have to have it. They look so good, they sound so good, and it's the quintessential version of all these films. Because I don't think we don't have a 4K release of all of them yet. We just have a 4K release of some of the big ones.
Main ones.
Yeah, there's eight films I think on 4K right now.
And honestly, I haven't seen any of the 4K, but I'm wondering if that's going to make that big of a difference. These Blu-rays have all the extras, documentaries, commentaries, a ton of stuff on there. So they, not just the quality of what the films look like, but all the extras you're going to get,
which is so important to me and will teach you so much. There's some great books out there about Universal, which I think are also kind of, required to have one or two of them. If you like to read horror books, it's a necessity. But this collection, it's your entire Universal monster education in one box that doesn't even cost that much for what you get in this day and age. And I hate to shill for a giant corporation like Universal, but in this case, worth every penny.
Yeah, because if you just watch the films, you would never know about Millicent Patrick.
Yeah.
You would never know about all the stuff that, hell, you wouldn't even know about Rico Browning.
Yeah.
So it's really important to watch the supplement stuff and the commentaries and buy some of the books and read up on them, or the magazines, because you will see the stuff differently. And it's amazing how your views will change, and not for the better or for the worse. You'll just see more things. You'll see it differently. Won't change your mind on what you might think of the film, but you'll see the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
And then you can watch Octoman and go, man, that movie's awesome. Although, okay, if you wanted to say the future of the creatures, that these films did inspire a next generation of man-fish sea creature monsters, from humanoids from the deep, Octoman, Demons of the Paradise. So we did get that next generation in the 80s and beyond. Maybe not having the best quality monster looking design, but they are out there. So it didn't just stop here.
And I mean, it's very arguable, very, very arguable. But without the Creature from the Black Lagoon, we would not have one of the two horror films that have ever won for Best Picture. Because whether The Shape of Water is a Creature from the Black Lagoon film, it certainly wouldn't exist if the Creature from the Black Lagoon hadn't.
Yeah,
correct.
Totally.
And in my eyes, it is a Creature from the Black Lagoon.
The fourth film.
No, it's just a version of,
in the universe of,
second cousin, third by marriage.
Well, it was what was in the Munsters,
Gil,
like Uncle Victor?
Gil,
was it Uncle Gil?
Uncle Gilbert,
Gilbert, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a creature in Mad Monster Party too.
Yeah, its legacy is strong and confusing. I mean, it's such a weird amalgam of things.
And while Abbott and Costello, there was no meets the creature from the Black Lagoon, on the Colgate Hour, Abbott and Costello did meet the creature.
Yeah. When they were promoting the film, they had it on there, which was very unique to show the monster before the film came out.
Yeah, very.
And I don't remember if that was Ben Chapman in the costume or not. I want to say it was, but I'm not 100% sure.
You would have to think, right? Because they're not going to make a whole other costume.
Yeah, it would have had to have been him.
Yeah.
But I mean, just imagine that, watching that TV show. Fucking creature from the Black Lagoon shows up. Holy shit.
I'm totally seeing this movie.
I got to see that movie. And then you're waiting for Abbott and Costello to show up going, what the hell?
You're always in the wrong place if you're waiting for Abbott and Costello to show up. And so, sadly, we come to the end of the Universal Monster cycle in time. But hopefully we made the point that there's a lot more to discover inside of all of these films each time you watch them. So we hope you'll join us on Facebook and Instagram at Discover the Horror and discuss these films with us. And obviously, make sure you keep watching classic horror films because, as you know, it's good for you.
The boiling blood!